so I will. Hi, everybody. I'm Benham Carbasi. Thank you for joining our panel called Visionary Transmedia. I won't go through all the various categories. The multi-level experience. So we'll figure out what that means along with you. I am President, CEO, founder of No Mimes Media. We're a multi-platform storytelling company. I'm a PGA producer and director as well. But today, I'll just be your lovely host. So let's meet the panel. Guys, would you like to introduce yourself? Why don't you start with you, Eric?
Sure. My name is Eric Shamlin. I'm managing director and executive producer of a company called Secret Location. We describe ourselves as a content studio for emerging platforms. We've been around about 8 years as a digital studio. We were very early on picking up the DK2 and whatnot, getting kind of excited about the prospects of VR. And so we've had some fairly good success so far. We produced a project with Fox for Sleepy Hollow that won the first Emmy for VR this past fall, and we now have we now have the first hybrid VR TV show with the Sci-Fi channel that will be debuting here in September, I believe. So as a studio, while VR is not all we do, it's definitely the shiny new toy, and it seems to be all the conversations we're having. So we're having a lot of fun with it, and we're trying to figure out what storytelling means in this medium.
I'm Jay Bushman. I guess I professionally go around and argue about what the word transmedia means.
Have you won any of those arguments?
There's no winners.
Okay.
No.
There's no winners in that argument. I'm a writer, producer of transmedia, multi-platform, whatever you want to call it, entertainment. Worked on projects such as the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is a modern multi-platform adaptation of Pride and Prejudice from a few years ago. I worked on a web series last year called, that was God, now I'm blanking on what the name was. It was Terminator Genesis, the YouTube Chronicles, which was a tie-in for the movie Terminator Genesis that had a VR component. For which I accidentally invented a new Terminator model, which was really fun. And as a writer-producer of new media content, I find myself over the past year or so in every conversation being asked if there's a VR element to the project. My response to that is usually, why do you want one? So this idea of trying to figure out what storytelling is in this new medium is something I've been grappling with a lot lately as well.
Hey everybody, my name's Hal Hefner, and I am a creative strategist and a pop artist. I've worked on some pretty cool things and helped build some pretty cool teams over the years. Actually, with a couple of folks at this table, I worked at Fourth Wall Studios, and most recently I worked for the company 3AM, and we produced all of the meta content for The Martian, Ridley Scott's newest film. And I currently am the curator and creator of a series of political pop art, which is a very scathing social commentary on pop culture, politics, and Donald Trump.
I'm Jennifer Palais, and I'm director of digital production at Greenlight Media and Marketing. And I've worked on a couple of really great projects as of late, and this past year has been really exciting for us as a company. Our niche is branded entertainment, branded content, with pulling together brands and artists. So our sister company is Red Light, and we have a lot of opportunity to collaborate with really, really amazing artists. This year we did something with Hyundai. We did a secret show with Imagine Dragons that I actually worked with No Mimes on with Benham and Steve, which was really successful. We were really excited about that. I did the strategy and the digital production, worked on that, and we most recently worked on the Intel Grammys Lady Gaga collaboration for the Grammy stage, and so I was able to work on the strategy for social for that and all the build-up, and then on the day of the live activation of the social conversation. That was really exciting. So.
Awesome. Thank you, and thank you for pinch hitting for us on the panel. There's been a couple of roster changes, but you know how that goes. All right, thank you guys for joining us. I'm going to start with a few questions, and feel free, panelists, to ask each other questions or just to talk. We have plenty of time. But I'll start with Eric, and we'll start on the subject of VR, but there's a ton of panels about that here, so we won't stay on it too long. But you know, everybody's talking about it, so let's. So Eric, you've worked on a few cool VR projects so far. So tell me this: what happens when you stop moving your head around? Like seriously, like that's my question. Is like, okay, I put the thing on, I'm looking around. All right, now what? So how is that, like, from a creative standpoint? How are you guys addressing those challenges?
Well, I mean, you always want to sort of lean into that ability to look around. I think there's kind of this early rule that you had to guide the user's vision, and I think that's kind of true, but I think if you're also telling an appropriate story, they're going to follow it regardless. So I think we call it the first 10-second rule. You know, it's just like, you know, being dropped into any environment. You give them 10 seconds to find out where the exits are, where the seats are, and you know where they are in the space. But once they're there and they've acclimatized to what the space is, if you're doing your job right as a storyteller, they're going to follow you. So there's no needing to, like, you know, everybody says you can use sound and action, and you know, these are all true. But if you're just telling a compelling story, they're going to follow it. You know, and sort of the glib sort of way is we live in a 360 world inherently, and I've not once looked behind me. So I think you need to kind of trust the audience that they'll know where to look, kind of thing. So.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So what do you think is the killer app for VR? And I'm going to write this down.
Right now, you know, I think games are going to definitely kind of win the market in the short term, but I think there's some of these social experiences and sort of creative utility experiences, for lack of a better word, that we think will be probably some of the more compelling stuff. I think, you know, probably the name most people are aware of is like Tilt Brush, which is a kind of a 3D 360 painting creation tool.
Right.
And there are a lot of artists that are really. I was at a thing in Venice a few weeks ago where they had a bunch of street artists come use it on stage, and so they're painting their graffiti sort of virtually, but then they would do this like mixed reality projection on the wall behind them. So you actually got to see them within their art, which was pretty compelling. And so stuff like that's given kind of a more social or multiplayer kind of angle to it, I think is going to be hugely compelling moving forward. So I think right now most of the content is sort of isolating or single user, single player. But I think once the medium becomes much more social and kind of multiplayer, I think it's just going to open up creative opportunities that are just really insane. Yeah.
Awesome. Panel, anything to say about that? About VR? Hal?
I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave.
I've been struggling with a lot of the where we are with VR at the moment. As I alluded to earlier, I'm in a lot of conversations or project discussions where it sort of comes up as an idle question, like, oh, maybe we can add a VR thing to it. It's mostly because VR is hot right now, and the interest in adding it kind of can be overwhelmed by the difficulties in executing it, and also a clear vision on what you want out of it and how to get that. And this extends all the way down to, I had an interesting experience last month when I was asked to write a script for a VR experience. And, you know, our script writing forms and language and conventions don't help with that. And, you know, so we're in this place where even the documentation that we come up with to describe or instruct people how to create something needs to be created out of whole cloth, or, you know, we need to adapt traditional script language in new ways. So yeah, it was an interesting challenge of how do you describe presence in a script? How do you describe, you know, if you look this way, if you look that way? How do you describe branches in a format that's 100 years old and has been relentlessly fine-tuned for a specific industrial production process? So that's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, we've been struggling with that with multi-platform storytelling, like when a video works with a piece of content on the web with something on mobile, how do you actually indicate that on a script that's just sort of linear?
Yeah, we've had to kind of rewrite or refigure out the storyboarding process. So we do traditional 16:9 boards to depict the sort of primary field of view, we call it. But then we do top-down dioramas now as well.
That actually sounds like a great way to tell stories. I mean, because being an artist myself, I always start with a storyboard, before often before the written word.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So Jay, keep it going. So let's talk about Lizzie Bennett for a minute.
Sure. I always like
Emmy-winning
talking about
Lizzie Bennett Diaries. So we've seen a lot of, this is sort of with VR, like the web series, the golden age of web series seems to be fading a little bit. What happened to the web series that we used to love so much a year ago?
We don't call them web series anymore. We just call it premium digital content.
Ooh, I like that. I can charge for that, right?
Yeah, premium. That's the important word there. It's been an interesting couple of years as the companies that produce and distribute web series are starting to put more money, put more resources into the content so it looks higher quality and it feels more professional. And that comes hand in hand with the prevalence of these new SVOD platforms, because they can afford to spend more money on content because they can afford to charge more money. And now there is a mechanism, and this is, working in the world of transmedia, we are become really, really used to being in panels like this, or other kinds of discussion forum, and talking about being really excited about storytelling. And the first question is always, well, how do you make money off of that? And it's been a lot of years of being like, oh, we don't really know. And only in the past couple of years has the various digital communities and businesses and niches started to really put together those tools and mechanisms, whether it's big SVOD platforms or networks, whether it's a service like Patreon, whether it's something I've gotten really interested in the past few weeks in the BitTorrent bundle mechanism, which allows you to charge your audience for digital content in a really elegant sort of way. So now that there's a way to make money, that's starting to get fed back into the production of content, which is exciting.
We've seen that over at Greenlight, that brands now, when they're wanting to, work with or access a different demographic, that they want to start to create content that will contribute to the culture of that age group, whether it's millennials or whoever it might be. And so they're willing to put money into creating content for the web. We did a web series with Under Armour just like a year ago or so. And they're seeing results from that, so they're realizing it pays off to contribute to the space.
Yeah, this just in, you can make money off of web series.
Crazy.
Seeing the Louis C.K. thing, for example, him funding his own deal and then whining about how it didn't make money, but apparently it's gonna make its money back. It's gonna do fine, and it's affordable. And so people are trying to crack this nut in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and any way that you can find a mechanism to allow content creators and audiences to interact directly and have there be a monetary relationship there without needing to aggregate into giant networks, I'm always a big fan of that. I mean, we're seeing with the SVOD platforms is there's this sort of race for them to snap up as much content as possible, which is great for them, but each of the individual productions involved, I wonder how much utility they're going to get out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we shall see. Okay, so Hal, what's going on, man?
Not too much, man.
All right.
What are you up to?
Well, I'm actually going to ask you what you've been up to. Hey, were you hacked recently?
I was. I actually.
Why? What'd you do?
Because I have a big mouth, and so sometimes people don't like what I say. So, especially, hopefully, I don't offend any of you in here, but I'm not a big. I don't have a big fan base in the right-wing Republican agenda. I am as I mentioned earlier, I'm a political artist, and I use pop culture to kind of make fun of the things that I think need to be made fun of. And so I actually I had an older WordPress website that I had been using as my portfolio for quite a while. And so I got a nice little wake-up call that I needed to upgrade when my website actually got hacked, and it was directing to a whole bunch of porn. And even though my last name's Hefner, I'm really not into porn. Neither is Playboy anymore, apparently.
Yeah.
So I noticed that, and then I went and I looked in my code, and there was all this like crazy like right-wing propaganda embedded into my code, and some death threats and things like that. So it was kind of interesting. But needless to say, I rebuilt my website fairly quickly, and it's up and running and better than before. And I like it.
It didn't want to make you stop? Give up the art?
No. It just actually, if anything, it kind of, burned a bigger fire under my ass to keep going and do more and to say more, because I just feel like we're at a wonderful time where the internet has created this message center where we can all talk to each other all over the world, and there's really some important things that need to be said, especially concerning the political arena of where we are today. And if you look at the 2016 presidential race, the circus that it's become, and what that holds for our future, I think these are important things that artists like myself need to really be talking about. It's pretty easy to draw pictures of Batman and do comic books and stuff like that, but it takes a lot more balls to get out there and say something and then stand behind what you said. And sometimes I want to run and hide from what I've said, but at least I'm saying something.
So obviously social's played a big part
Yes,
in all this stuff.
social, and all the things that I've learned over the years through working in the space that we consider transmedia and digital. I've worked for several different advertising agencies and held many roles, including working as like a recruiter, team building strategist, as well as a creative strategist, where I was able to participate in everything from design and art, storyboards, and even script writing and things of that nature. So it's fun, and all that stuff is really kind of culminating in the series that I'm working on right now, which is really been all over the internet, which I'm so grateful for.
Where can people see this? You
can just check out my actual website at halhefner.com, or you can go to directly to the Consume website, which is consumepopculture.com, and that's where all my consume-centered art is. And the Hal Hefner website is just my giant portfolio from all through the years.
But there's no porn there, right?
There is no porn.
Okay.
There's no porn.
Gotcha.
I'm porn free. Consumepopculture.com.
Lovely.
Thank you.
That's the only, since it's art, we'll
Yes.
plug it.
Yes, thank you.
There's no business model.
So now you're working with Deviant Art, and artists have always been at the cutting edge of storytelling. So
Yes.
what are you seeing now, like in the new forms of storytelling, like artists doing crazy, cool new shit?
Well, I think there's actually a fun, and Jay kind of touched on it a little bit ago, about Patreon. Surprisingly, I actually, when I first heard of Patreon's existence, I thought, who the hell is going to pay for a Photoshop file? But people do. So, which, I guess you never underestimate the power of the internet. And so Patreon has really done some interesting things, and I think is in a way, pushing people to innovate and do some cooler things that they might not have done before in order to sell it. So artistically, what we're seeing is with DeviantArt, what you've got basically the first social network for artists. And it has maintained a pretty strong community over its 16 years, but it's evolved. And so the demographic it can skew very, 14 to, 16-year-old girls, as it can skew to, 30 to 50-year-old men like myself that are on there. So it is, it's a large mix of people, and so you get all sorts of different people doing different things. And one of the strangest things that I've seen is these things called adoptables, where artists that have this very, very strong following create these characters, and they put them out there, and people can adopt them and by paying like $3.95 for this character, and it becomes yours. And so that is an interesting thing. And then what you see is, like, I saw this one girl who purchased one of those adoptables from this artist, then created this whole story and this whole story world about this character, and then other characters grew from it and everything. So it's almost like, it reminded me of that whole, telling the story around the campfire, and it changes and stuff like that. I mean, it's the Wild West.
Yeah.
The digital Wild West. So
That's cool.
I think that's one interesting thing that I've seen. And then webcomics seem to be really taking off too. And there's a company called Webtoons, which was started in Korea and is now really taking shape in the United States, and they've done some really cool things, and they have actually worked on some pieces of what we'd call transmedia. They actually ran this comic with Marvel that was the entire Star Wars saga of the original trilogy through Luke's perspective.
Oh.
So it was super cool, and it was like,
Cool.
yeah, so it was a lot of things that, we've talked about over the years that never came to fruition, but it was a pretty fascinating thing to see it from view and told in a digital comic. So there was little tweaks to the story. There's some similarities between Star Wars, but there was, some interesting things that you got between him and Biggs and some other folks that weren't in the movie. So it was super cool. So I think that's, some of the things that we possibly do artistically and digitally that we're seeing today.
Awesome. So speaking of artists, let's talk about musicians for a minute.
Oh, nice.
So working on this Lady Gaga, the big David, I don't know if you guys remember, it was the big David Bowie tribute on the Grammys, and she had this crazy robot keyboard, and there was like crazy projections on her face. It was insane. So tell us about like how music and tech kind of work together in that moment.
I think that's happening a lot, as we see, we're talking about just artists in general. So, musicians are really wanting to capitalize on making their shows look great, and also just bringing their fan base a new kind of experience. So what we tend to try to do is make sure when we have, a brand that wants to, influence a space like a young creative class, that we partner them with the right, music partner, basically. Not somebody who just, we can just kind of slap logos on things or banners or whatever, but where both kind of, the artist and the brand are mutually benefiting one another, and it's an actual collaboration. That's what we, at Greenlight, we try to say we create culture rather than just kind of, piggybacking off what's there already. So we do that to the best of our ability. So when Intel came to us and they, wanted to get more awareness out there about what they do, because with Apple, like, you can see these beautiful products, but Intel it's all hidden. So they wanted to get kind of up the cool factor a little bit and just the awareness. So we went through lists and lists of like who would make the most sense. And since Lady Gaga is always innovating, and that's really what Intel is about, is innovation. It was a natural fit, and she was really excited, and Intel was really excited, and so it was amazing actually to see the development. Because basically, like, the first meeting that I was in, the engineers were in there, and then we had Lady Gaga's team and like her choreographer, and the Intel guys are like, well, we have these. It was almost like they put their toys on the table, like we could do this facial mapping, and we have robots, and it was like we could do this or this or this, and then the guys are like, oh, well, could you make it fly, or could you, like, there were like 50 people in a room, and it was just these guys kind of riffing. But what was exciting too was to see, a lot of times they say, oh, our engineers are so kind of, like flat, or maybe not, like boring, or whatever that is. But I really saw this beautiful creative collaboration happening in that room. The engineers were just as excited and creative, because the choreographers are saying, could you do this? Could you do this? And they're like, oh, let me think. I can't promise because we only have a few weeks, but so it was really neat to see. The technology they're coming at it from this creative, artistic point of view, and that's the difference that I saw, and that was kind of where my strategy was for social, was let's tell the creative process of the engineer on social leading up to the event, because it was this big secret, where they didn't want to show anything backstage. It was very difficult. It was very difficult to tell without telling, show without showing. So that's what we did to the best of our ability. We focused on the engineers and how they kind of developed their creativity around this amazing force of nature, which is kind of Lady Gaga and her crew. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Sounds fun.
It was fun.
So we'll kind of start to talk about some group questions too. So guys, feel free to chime in here. But just keeping going, Jennifer. What do you think the impact of social has been on the music business and like the tech, like digital that you've been doing on music?
So I've been more focused on that side of things for just like the last year and a half. So I don't feel I don't want to say over the last like 10 or 15 years exactly, but I have seen, because we get to speak a lot with the music managers over at Red Light, and it's really different for each artist, where they're trying to figure out, like, okay, this is the kind of fan base that we have, or this is the age that we have, and so which platforms make the most sense. But I think overall, and it was really exciting actually to work with Lady Gaga's team and see how that machine worked in terms of social. And she posts, on Twitter, she posts herself, and it's a very specific like protocol in terms of what, if you want to get certain things posted, like, make sure this link is in there, but it's a specific thing. So the artists are getting to share with their fans directly, and I think that's really, and show pieces of themselves. There's another artist who at Red Light, who she's showing this side of herself that's like supportive of of like women's rights and girls, and like just kind of getting in on a different angle with the fan base, and that kind of blew up, and she's like many thousands of new followers over the last months, just based on being able to have a platform where they can share themselves artistically, but also these pieces of themselves that aren't as easy to get out there. So yeah. That's probably artists in general, but in music, and the budgets are kind of not there for music for the most part, like a few of them. So this is a great way also for people to get new listeners. So.
That's awesome. So guys, do you see social storytelling developing, since this is a storytelling panel? Like Jay, I just saw somebody released a feature on Snapchat.
I saw the headline
I was like,
about that.
I missed it, so
I
we're
need to see more of what they actually mean. But that's actually a really interesting illustration of old language versus new language.
Yeah.
What does a feature mean? When you
feature
say a
film.
feature,
Yep.
like what does that word actually convey? And a feature film is generally a film that you go to a movie theater and watch, and it's 90 minutes to 2.5 hours long and has a certain shape to it. So when you import that to Snapchat, having not seen it, I can't weigh in on it, but does saying we did a feature on Snapchat mean you told a story that lasted 90 minutes, or are they trying to convey something else? And I don't want to pick on that particular project since I haven't seen it, but this is indicative of a lot of our conversations in this space, because it's all new. We are constantly taking language from older media and trying to push it into new media, and this is a recipe for lots and lots of confusion and disagreement and people not being on the same page. See previous comments about 10 plus years arguing about the definition of transmedia.
Yeah.
Like, we're all trying to use language we're comfortable with to describe new story formats and new story forms that we're not comfortable with. And so everybody's got a slightly different take on everything.
Yeah. Yeah, feature film on Snapchat is neither a feature nor
Nor
a
a
film.
film.
It's only on
Discuss.
Snapchat.
Yeah.
Jay, do you find that though, just if I may ask questions, because I know I have heard you also talking about transmedia and the word, and it is important, to have a language, and that for me over the last like 5 to 10 years, when trying to work on social activations or films or whatever, you know, this person's calling this is the thing, and this person's calling it this and this, like 10 different ways to refer. Even with the Lady Gaga experience, that we did a 90-second short, or you know, it was a commercial, but we were like, oh, the film that's going, and I'm like, but it's a minute and a half, like you know, I don't know that that's a film. So I mean, how have you handled that, I guess, in your experience?
To varying degrees of
I don't feel so bad
niceness or frustration.
Okay.
I mean, some of these arguments have gotten pretty damn heated, and you have to sort of remember to stop and take a step back and remember that everyone's trying to make something, and we all may be using similar terms to describe different things. So I always like to say, I mean, there are certain corners of the transmedia world that, you know, they don't even want to talk about the word. Like, the word's verboten, like, let's not even use it. And you use it, the eyes roll, the argument starts. What does that mean? And I used to be, the joke I make is at any given time I've been on every single side of the argument about the term. And I've gotten to the place where it's like, you know what, that's just where we start the conversation. That to use a word like transmedia, or sometimes multi-platform instead, we all want words to mean one thing that everyone understands. That's a tall order for any word, like blue, much less transmedia. So I always like to think of transmedia being the first cut. Like, we're going to talk about transmedia. That means we're not talking about, I make movies, so let's talk about movie making. I'm not talking about television. I'm not talking about music. Like, these are all robust industries with decades of history, processes, systems, assumptions in place. So to start a conversation saying we're going to be talking about something that is transmedia is to say we're not working in any one of those systems. We're working in a space that will pull from many of them. Then we have to keep talking. We can't just say it's transmedia and we're done. Like, to say transmedia is just to say it's not any of these other things. Now we got to drill down into what it is we're actually talking about. So to my mind, transmedia has become simply this enormous pool of potential projects that then you have to define what your medium is within that pool.
That's interesting. And I did not ask the panel what is transmedia. If you're wondering what it is and don't know, you can go ahead and Google that. I will save you guys. I will save you guys the trouble.
No, actually, I've got a quick one. I got a quick answer to this
Okay,
one.
go.
This is how I've developed this over the years, because this comes up.
100 panels
Believe it or
in.
not, this comes up all the freaking time.
That was our
Transmedia
panel
means
too.
telling stories over multiple platforms. However, that definition changes depending on your definition of stories, of multiple, of platform, of telling, even over. You can change the meaning of each of those words to get a wildly different outcome, yet they all fill the definition of telling stories over multiple platforms.
Wow. That was a great, meaningless.
Thank you. It took me a dozen years to get there.
Yeah. No, that was awesome. All right. So jumping back to VR for a minute, Eric, do you think people are going to pay for VR? They actually going to pay to do this stuff?
They already are.
Oh,
So
they're paying you.
Yeah, well, I mean, depends on who you're saying is paying, but
Yeah.
Clients are definitely paying, but consumers are already paying. Vive's already got for as many headsets are out there, it's already a robust ecosystem. It's a very active consumer ecosystem on Vive right now. And then if you go international, China's got a massive VR ecosystem right now.
They do.
Yeah, VR cafes and VR, cyber cafes type pop-up shops are pretty popular there.
I want a VR bar.
Yeah.
Right?
A VR.
Yes, a
VR
VR
bar.
bar. Like, just a really cool place where you can go, drink alcohol, do your thing, and go into another world.
Yeah.
Do
It's like a barcade, but with
A
VR.
barcade,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's great.
VR Varcade.
But it is a social experience, though, especially in China and stuff, where people are doing it with
Yeah,
other
it's a
people.
VR-cade. I mean, essentially in China.
Yeah.
Here, I mean, it's still very much an at-home sort of. It's a console type experience here,
Yeah.
where the Vive, it's PC based, but people are taking over their guest bedrooms or a portion of their living room to to do these things, and yeah, they're already it's already monetized, and we, obviously our company is hoping it'll get bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
But we're also pretty conservative about it. We don't think we're going to be millionaires by the end of the year. We think it'll probably take 2 or 3 years for it to really become a fleshed out economy, I guess, and then for it to go mainstream is probably even longer. Because that's really just early adopters and gamers. I think over the first couple of years.
Yeah.
Mainstream is probably 5 years away, because there's a lot of hurdles for a mainstream audience. I mean, it's still a very sort of clunky, heavy experience. The user experience needs a lot of work, and just the technologies itself need to mature quite a bit for a more mainstream audience. But the early adopters are already starting to pay.
And that's not even taking into consideration the price points and things like that, which
the
you
different
continuously
models.
hear people complaining about, that these VR headsets are set too high. So
Just wait.
yep, exactly.
It's all
Just
V1.
hang out, it'll all come. Awesome. Okay, I got one more general panel question. I'm just starting to notice in the industry we still do, and talking about influencers and online internet influencers, and get this person to promote this product, and you'll get. To me, it feels like the influencer bubble is bursting. Do you
Hope
guys
so.
feel the same way?
Yes.
Well, it's just becoming so ridiculous, where you need somebody to just come down and make an appearance, and it costs a ridiculous amount of money, and it's just.
Does it actually work? Do
Yeah, they've
people
not been able to
It works.
translate
It
that
works.
off their channels. There's been a lot of influencer-based content that's not been able to transact.
Yeah.
Somebody who some of us have worked with in the past has been fond of saying, and he says this is an insult. I don't use it as an insult, although I think the word is good. Describes the modern sort of contemporary influence culture, especially on YouTube, as the 21st century equivalent of vaudeville. And he means vaudeville as an insult. I don't mean vaudeville as an insult, because vaudeville's great if what you want is vaudeville. What we find ourselves in is a place where we've got all these 21st century vaudevillian influencers that now are trying to get pushed into bigger, larger, different things that is different than what it is they do.
Yeah.
Sometimes that'll work.
Yeah.
Sometimes it won't. It's really very
Scare
different
Foodie
than-
Pie.
Right. It's not all that different than when you put a model in your movie, or when you put an athlete you put an ex-football player in your TV show. A lot of times that's not going to work, but that's not to say that it's never going to work.
Yeah.
There are athletes and models who have become brilliant actors. The story I always like to tell to describe this phenomenon is, if you all remember the show The Wire on HBO, Method Man from Wu-Tang Clan was in that, played one of the characters in that. He auditioned for that part 8 times and won it, where there were tons of other rappers who would call up The Wire's production offices and say they wanted to be on the show. And they were like, you know what, that's okay, no thank you. Method Man won the part. If you can win the part, great. But, putting somebody in the role just because they bring an audience with them, no guarantee their audience is going to follow,
None.
and no guarantee that they're going to be good at the thing you're asking them to.
And it often, and more times than not, doesn't meet the expectations that are set forth.
Yeah.
I don't know. We've had good results lately. I don't know. Maybe
works
it's the
too,
music
right?
Space. I don't know. Maybe it's the music space or
Yeah.
something like that, or being really strategic about exactly who you're trying to attract.
Yeah, and that's
then,
that's it.
yeah.
Like,
I
if
mean,
you
it
have
just
the
depends.
smart
You can't
strategy
slap it on.
behind
Yeah,
it.
you have to think it through. I mean, we spent months. I had one producer just on the influencer portion to make sure that it was the right fit, and that. And monitoring how they were going to, we didn't dictate, because that's the big thing, is that they get to speak to their audiences in the way that their audiences understand them, but still storyboarding out what we were hoping to have them convey, and that sort of thing. So I think if you're specific.
Yeah, because you're not gonna take the brony guy who opens up My Little Pony bags and toys and bring it to something that just doesn't fit, And if
No,
you,
it has to be.
It's like fitting the square peg in the round hole thing.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. You see, if they're, for us, it's music, then, you're not bringing in just fashion. Or, Lady Gaga, all of it would have worked. But we've used them for other things, so. Yeah, it can't.
Awesome.
Do you feel like it's going away? Is that what you guys are
I don't know if it's going away.
I mean, I feel like
I don't
it's
know if
bigger.
I just don't know if I think at one point, so many people thought they were influencers and could capitalize on that.
funny.
And
That's
I think what you're referring to is the fact that maybe that money is not there as much for those folks anymore. Correct?
And also
I think we're
the
learning-
sort of brand integration.
Yeah, I think we're
like-
learning how and when to use them.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
a lot of brands were like, "Oh, let's just get influencers
Yeah.
to do this thing," and
Yeah.
it just never didn't
not-
work.
it's not
Or
that easy,
let's
yeah.
build a show. The PewDiePie reference is a great one. Let's
Yeah.
build a show around him. Well, he's not an actor.
He's
like,
not an actor.
Yeah,
Like so,
that's the problem.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
we're learning how to use them, and so that ecosystem has now matured, and we now know where in the strategy that belongs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. Okay, so we'll open it up to questions in a couple minutes, so get your questions ready. But until then, I just wanted to leave a few minutes per person just to talk about something that bugs them. I call it something to shout about. For example, for me, on-demand advertising is the biggest missed opportunity in the universe right now to me. Like a forced audience member having to watch the same commercial over and over and over again. I don't know what's wrong with people. I don't know why they're not making way more money doing that, because I am like, I cannot change it if it's on the web. So I'm watching that thing and you show me the same 5 commercials, it's not going to work.
Hulu,
So
like Hulu?
I don't get it. I don't know where that money's going or why it's not going in the right place. So that's an example.
What would you do instead? Can I just ask that really quick? Like
Well,
tell
I
a
would,
story or something?
Yeah, I would make the buy as relevant as it would be on TV. I would make it as relevant online or on demand, even more so.
Yeah.
There's one that's like an interactive one, but they play it. There's one on was it like Travelocity or somebody or Expedia, and they call it an interactive ad, and you can skip all the other ads if you just do the interactive ad. And it's like this Mr. Obvious campaign, and he just does a staring contest with you, and just that 30 seconds is way more engaging than seeing the same Ford commercial 17 times.
Yeah.
It just is.
Yeah.
And so I would make it a decent and not just a freebie. Like VOD is no longer the freebie bonus buy that it once was. People are using these platforms more so than ever, and more so every year as time will continue. So why not make it a part of your media plan rather than the bullshit that nobody else listens to? So that's an example of something to whine about. Go ahead. Anyone? You got something? Jay, I know
No,
you
I've
got
got tons
something.
of things. I was trying to pick one. See, and I had a thing, and now I forgot it. Okay, here's the thing. I got something.
I knew it.
Yeah. I think as an industry and as a group, and I don't mean to say, a lot of times we sit around and complain about what the big companies are doing. Like, oh God, they're screwing all of us. And that's not what I mean by this, because I think we're all guilty of unicorn chasing, of looking for the thing that's going to change everything, and then we're going to figure it out, and then everything's going to be different. And that never happens. And what ends up happening is you get a couple of examples of success, and then things shut down. I'll as an example, I'll use House of Cards premieres, and then we have to spend a year of, well, should every show be a binge show? No. Like, something worked once, and you can debate whether or not it actually worked or not, but then suddenly now this is just the way everything has to be, and we spent a year arguing about, does the binge model works for some things, but it really doesn't work for lots and lots and lots of things, and can we calm down a little bit and just figure out that developments, new inventions, new formats, new ways of doing things are wonderful, but they don't wipe away everything that's come beforehand.
That's a good one. Ooh, that really bugged him. Anyone else? Got something? No?
I don't know. Maybe a little bit
You're all
about
happy?
social. On social, just it's more been with brands because that's who we deal with. But trying to, use the platforms in the way they're meant to, with authenticity and connection, rather than just another place to put a commercial.
Yeah.
Basically, so that's something I just feel like. I don't know how many times, because I'm sure we've all heard this example. You don't run into a networking event and be like, buy this, buy my stuff or whatever. You start a conversation, you get to know people, and why can't brands do that? Well, they can, but it's very difficult to convince them to do that. So that's been a pain point.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, perfectly on time. Amazing. Okay, so time for the audience questions, and I'm going to repeat them. I don't think there's a roving mic, so speak to me, and I will repeat it for the live stream that's going on. So, does anybody have questions? Right there.
My question is for Eric. I'm just curious what you learned from making your first VR project, the Sleepy Hollows experience, to the Sci-Fi episodic series. What you learned from that production and post-production perspective and the storytelling perspective.
So the question was, if I may, what you learned going from a standalone Sleepy Hollow style experience to a serial-based experience now that you're working with Sci-Fi. Is that correct? Awesome.
You learn a lot. And what you learn very quickly is that virtual reality or these types of projects, they take a lot of well-honed veteran mediums, filmmaking, games, software, a number of mediums, and just sort of like screw them all up. And so, so you bring professionals together that have got great credentials, great experience in any of those mediums, but then they're kind of starting from scratch with this one. So it's taking a lot of these things, and it's truly sort of a converged medium. And so there's been a lot of like head scratching and frustrations because not only does it sort of like render your skills somewhat challenged, the tools themselves to make this stuff are you know, the platforms are, they're very version 1, so they're very rudimentary. Working on the Sleepy Hollow project, you know, I'm not going to give too much away. It's Sleepy Hollow. In the experience, we cut your head off, right? So first person POV of your head tumbling. We had to fight with Oculus because they thought it would just make everybody sick. So there's just like a lot of these things that you have to just keep pushing and hope that the technology sort of catches up. And then, you know, just across the board, it's like the cameras are a challenge, editing's a challenge, visual effects are a challenge. So there's just a ton of learning and kind of exploring and trying to patch things together to see if they work. And luckily, we've had partners and clients and brands that have sort of allowed us to experiment on their dime, and now we're getting better at it. You know, this isn't our first rodeo anymore, but still the tools and the storytelling techniques are adapting sort of on the fly.
And are you seeing the networks sort of appreciate it as storytelling, or is it more of a gimmick still for them?
That's a good question. I think they are starting to see it more as a storytelling because that language is starting to come about. We're now 2 or 3 years into the medium, so it is more of a game-like medium, you know, at its core. So you have to rely on a lot of those types of skill sets. I think it is kind of it's also an expensive medium, and so a lot of the brands and entertainment, you know, studios and broadcasters, they're starting to see it more as a product release. So if they're going to invest the whatever dollars into it, they want to see more than PR, and that's been sort of a term in the industry that so far it's been VR for PR. And
Yeah, because a lot of it's been coming out of marketing.
Yeah.
budgets.
yeah,
Right.
So
And then they
now
see
they
the
want
sticker price and they
yeah.
get sticker shock and like, oh,
So
let's
now
not
they
do
want
that.
to productize it. So most of the brands and stuff, they're like, hey, we're going to build this cool thing. Can we then go sell it for $1.99 on the
Right.
Vive store?
Because The Martian wants to do that still.
Yeah.
Martian's doing that, and there's a few other movie projects coming out that are in this similar vein, where they want to charge, you know, whatever, $4.99, $10.99, and see if they can get some sort of ROI on it.
Rad.
Yeah, because the original concept that we came in with for The Martian was just like, so it kind of blew their minds and blew the budgets and stuff. So we had to, and also timing, like that was the big thing, like what you were saying. Like the technology is, you know, it takes a long time to build these renders and to do all this stuff. So it's, you know, in order to do something good, you have to really plan it out in so many different ways than you would, you know, think of in terms of normal storytelling. So it you know, takes a lot longer, and it obviously it'll get faster as you know, more people progress in you know, this medium. So it's just a matter of time. It's like anything else, like riding a bike. You know, you get better at it the more you ride it, the more you do it. So VR is the same way.
Awesome. More questions right there.
Go back to the comments that you just made, that this is a very expensive game to start with, and the user base is not. And the fact that a good chunk of people get motion sickness just watching regular stuff, not to mention the type of content that you talk about. So where do you think you will get to the break-even point that
So the question was, given the expense and the motion sickness and all that stuff, what the hell are you thinking? No. When are you gonna get profitable? Or when do you think your ROI is gonna start happening?
I don't know. It's a birth of a new medium. You tell me when it's going to mature, and we'll figure that out. But
Yeah.
depending. I mean, Goldman Sachs has done a dozen studies on it now. There's a study that upwards of $1 billion is going to go into marketing this as a thing in the fall. So there's a lot of good signs that it will be a thing. But to be conservative, you have to pretty much gamble on gamers at this point. And Call of Duty is the biggest entertainment franchise in the world, so they do spend money. So you need to make sure that you're developing content that market is going to go for. It's a gamble. There's no guarantees, but you make smart bets. You're trying to figure out. We've got the Sci-Fi thing. We've got a major novel that we've optioned to develop into a VR franchise, and we're trying to place smart bets. It's sci-fi, it's horror, it's things that those early adopters will be into. We hope. And we're hoping to ride that lift of marketing dollars that's going to go into it this fall, and then come next year start getting some return. But when are we going to break even? Who knows? I hope in the first couple of years, but we're also willing to sort of wait it out in 3 to 5 years, see if it becomes a real thing.
Yeah, but the sci-fi is smart play.
Yeah.
The geeks are there, and
Yeah.
they want it. They want that
Well,
content.
and they tried it with Defiance, like that was the first
Oh, yeah.
kind of thing
Yeah,
that they
with
did.
the console.
Yeah, and I worked on some of them, a little game for a meta game for that franchise, and you could see again very similar to what we're dealing with today. Like some people really embraced it, and then others just didn't. It's one of those things where it's a crapshoot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just have to see what's going to happen. But just out of curiosity, since digital Hollywood pretty much seems like VR Hollywood, how many of you guys are all here for VR? Who? Raise your hands. Okay, so all you guys want to be the next VR stars. Awesome. Cool. All right. Well, cool. Seems like a good place to start.
VR Hollywood it
Yep,
is.
VR Hollywood. Excellent.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was a Transmedia panel, but to us, Transmedia means anything. That's
Yeah.
why we've been jumping around so much and
Yeah.
talking about all these different things, because, like Eric said at the beginning, it's just storytelling
Yeah.
at the end of the day, and so
And
that's,
regardless of whatever medium you're dealing with, with VR, you're still going to need other elements to market it in all their media. So it's
Yep.
good to know about it all.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions? Questions? We've stumped the audience, or they've all fallen asleep. One of those. Here we go.
Do you guys, in terms of transmedia with social media integration, do you guys have any specific projects you've seen that are doing that really effectively, like Snapchat actually being a venue for new storytelling?
Maybe East Los High.
I have an answer to
Slow
that one
side.
actually. So the question was social media integration within Transmedia. Have we seen a use of that, or effective use of that platform? Is that correct?
Effective.
Yeah. let me correct myself. So a project of Steve Peters, my partner, and shameless plug here for us, did a project called Dark Detour, and it was basically solely taking place. The story was being told on social media. So it used, Twitter, Instagram, Periscope, you name it, and the story was natively developed and told on social media. And it was funded a couple years. He had huge audience numbers and funded a couple years on Kickstarter. So people are starting to, we just did a poll about it, and people engaged on that thing. It was 7 days long last year, for 2 years in a row. People engaged 35 minutes or more a day on average. A day. And on that one story. And so that is our story to sponsors, is that you can use social media to not engage them you can do it for 10 seconds, but you can also do it for longer if you do it right with a good story. So
Yeah.
panel?
I mean, there have been a ton of projects that have done, really
Very well,
interesting stuff. We talked a little bit, we didn't get really too into the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which was really built on this as a kind of a basis where the anchor of the show was 2 weekly videos on YouTube, but every character had in fiction social media presence, and we use them to tell major story events. So by the end of the show, it was, I think, 35 individual social media accounts across a half a dozen different platforms. Other shows that have kind of come after that are using that same model for telling modern adaptations of classics have been really, really successful. One I would point to is Carmilla, which is actually produced by James Millward from Secret Location, is one of the producers of that. That's a really great show. There's another one that's happening right now called All for One. These are mostly coming out of Canada right now. There's The New Adventures of Peter and Wendy,
Oh, yeah.
which is a retelling of Peter Pan. And then the other place I would keep my eye on is there's a production company in Hollywood called Astronauts Wanted that is starting to roll out some scripted content where the social media is embedded into the narrative. And they've done some Snapchat experiments that have been pretty interesting to look at. Sure.
Cool. That's a great answer. Okay, any other questions? Questions? Wow. Haven't had that before. Fantastic. All right, we can end it a little early, or unless I can try to make up a question right now.
Actually, I've got a question for the people in the audience. I missed I wanted to see the panel at 9 this morning that talked about immersive theater in VR. Did anybody see that? And because that's the thing that I'm
Me
fascinated by, because of all the stuff that I've seen in VR and the conversations we've had about VR storytelling, the problems that come up, theater solved these centuries ago.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me that if we can pull lessons from the theater that aren't usually thought of by the people the technically minded people that are creating VR, if we can get those two camps together, I think there's a lot of really, really great stuff from the theater that we can pull into VR and make work.
Just to sort of comment on that. Go ahead.
Oh, that sucks.
Oh, that's too bad.
That's too
That's
bad.
a really good reference. I mean,
Yeah, no, it is. It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the
Don't
one of the
get me
safe
started.
bets we're trying to place is exactly queuing off that. So I'm not a horror fan, but there's a really cool immersive horror troupe called Blackout, and so we've partnered with them to kind of figure out what horror could be in VR. That's cool. And it's using their sort of immersive theater sort of background. You know, they're the kinds of guys, they take over a warehouse in San Francisco every fall, and they charge $40 to go through, and it's an R-rated haunted house. Like, it's a really explicit kind of graphic experience.
That's a great place
and
to
so we've
start.
partnered with them to develop a VR franchise because of that sort of theater DNA.
And it just makes sense too, especially in horror. Like, just imagine if you're able to create a VR experience where Freddy Krueger comes to life in your dreams, like for real. You know what I mean?
Well,
For
I
real.
was thinking you sort of, Benham, your first question was a little glib about, what happens when I'm done, like, looking side to side. But if we think about, like, especially for horror, if you think back to a movie like Jaws, and how much of the power of that is, here's your frame and it's on the water line and you can't look down.
Yeah.
Although everything in your body wants to look down or wants to look behind you, and you can. That the tension in VR of, like, I keep looking behind me and you can never look everywhere at once, that's made for VR. And that's great.
That's why it causes that fun paranoia, which is prime for horror.
But I also feel
somebody
like there are
behind
different places in the theater to look that I don't see people talking about. Like, so you talk about the question in VR of, like, focus, of how do you guide focus and tell the audience where to look. The musical theater has figured this out already, where if you go to a musical, no matter who you are looking at on stage, there's something happening, but they're all singing the same song, so your oral experience keeps you locked into the story no matter where you look. Like, VR can learn from this.
No.
Where are the VR musicals? That's
Rocky
a trick
Horror.
question I'm actually working on.
And that's where we're going to end.
yeah.
Where are the VR musicals?
The VR horror movie.
Well, I'd like to thank the panel. I think we're running out of time here, but I'd like to thank the panel, the audience, for staying awake.
Thank you.
and,
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. See you next time.
I love sleep more. That's the best.